Hello and welcome to the special online edition of Carte Blanche's COVID-19 Q&A session. I am Masa Kekana. Remember to click on subscribe so you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes. Today we are honing in on our mental health during this lockdown. Joining me, I have political analyst Ralph Matera. Ralph, it's been a roller coaster when it comes to a democracy right now. What exactly do you make of what's going on, being restricted in our movements, being restricted in what we can even buy as well?
Well, I think that this is very unprecedented for humanity. For humankind that is used to expressing their civil liberties, their right to buy what they want, their right to complain about everything. I mean, we are a very dynamic society here in South Africa. We are used to having protests as part of our way of daily engagement, and people now have realized that they actually cannot go out and protest. So this is the most severe limitation of civil liberties. But again, as our constitutions say, you cannot argue about your right to go buy cigarette if you are dead. So now I guess the main priority is to protect the right to life, which is a paramount life right that we can, under which we can also enjoy all other rights. It is something that we have not seen before. It is quite taxing on the mind. It is not easy. I mean, I'm used to working from home. On average, I'm in my house 5 days a week. But once in a while, I realize heading to the gate that, wait a minute, I cannot go out and breathe outside. And it's very taxing. I realize that for the first time, the state is actually saying to me, stay at home. It is in your own interest. It takes a great deal of mental transition to have to live with something such as this.
Now, you mentioned something so evident and profound in our fabric as South Africans, protest, for instance. I mean, this was what used to dominate our news, and that doesn't seem to be the case anymore, obviously. How do you think this will affect us when it comes to moving into local government elections next year? Because for what it seems, social distancing is going to be with us for quite the foreseeable future.
Indeed, I mean, the reality is that we are going to have to learn to live with this virus. The idea that we can plan on the basis of the virus not being there, it's just not going to work. We are going to have to survive. And social distancing in a dynamic society such as this, a society with this level of political dynamism, you point out there that we are headed for local government. I mean, at the capital city where governments sit, where this government is managing everything else, there is no local government. There is no government in the metropolitan city of Tshwane, where everything else is being managed by the president. Government sits there. So it just shows you how our politics is going to just bottle. I mean, our politics is currently frozen, and you know the tensions that actually characterized us going into this. I mean, local government, the city of Johannesburg, campaigning were about to start this year. Conventionally, it was going to be the year of massive gathering where campaigns are taking place. Suddenly, everything else is frozen. To be honest with you, I don't know how the pressure will be released when we come out of this lockdown, or are we going to have to function politically, digitally, maybe embrace new platforms, just to make sure that at least we express ourselves politically? Because my fear is that if we depend on coming out politically one day, issues will just be so many that I don't think we will move anywhere near a solution. So we've got to gradually learn to function politically. Maybe we can experiment with a by-election. Let people vote on their cell phones. Let's see about that. Why not?
Very, very interesting times we're heading into, because, you know, campaigning without social gatherings is going to be very difficult for political parties. And it's a very tricky, very, very tricky place that government finds itself in, to be able to tackle this virus, and as well as manage the day of politics, the day-to-day runnings of politics. How are we going to function with a capital city that is basically non-existent right now is very, very concerning. So thank you very much, Ralph, for adding those points. Is there anything else from your side that you think we should be covering as well when we're talking about this on a political front?
I think that most importantly is that it is always enticing towards the executive to march on their own when it's time like this. We have seen across the world where government have not been consulting so well with civil society organizations. The reality is that civil society organizations and community-based organizations, those are the people who have got the best intelligence and knowledge about the communities. We need to be able to bring them to fore. We need to consult with those community-based organizations because they are the ones that are going to help to manage this. This is not about the next 4 weeks. It might be the next 18 months. If we are going to be on this for a long haul, we need all partners to come in. Government should actually meaningfully engage with those other partners, business, social partners, labor, and civil society organizations. Most importantly, they need to be brought in because without them, I don't think government will be able on its own. It does not have capacity to carry out this on its own.
Thank you so very much, Ralph. Also joining us on the line, we've got Dr. Bianca Moffat. Now, we've been talking to a group of volunteer doctors in Mpumalanga who've been holding workshops with nurses to prepare the staff to debunk stigma and also to ease the mental challenge burden. So, Dr. Moffat, if you could please give us the lay of the land.
So I'm a medical doctor with postgraduate training and experience in public mental health, and I've been working at the MRC Wits Agincourt Public Health Unit in rural Mpumalanga. And we've been working with the hospitals and clinics around here to help them coordinate their response to COVID-19 and to prepare their institutions and staff. So a key aspect of this has been engaging with the staff at these facilities around what do they need from a infrastructure and practical point of view to get their facilities ready. So how did they set up isolation areas? How do they do screening and triage? And how do they make sure they have the right equipment to deal with patients? Additionally, we've been doing information sessions with the staff, which we've used in the format of question and answer sessions to give staff an opportunity to express what they've heard, express their concerns, and ask questions and make sure that everyone's on the same page in terms of what information is available and what information we should be giving to staff and to patients and community members. So in the beginning, we noticed that staff were quite anxious. And then we found, as we started engaging with the sessions, it gave them an opportunity to express their concerns. And a lot of them said they found that the sessions helped them to feel much more empowered to deal with it afterwards because they knew what the real risks were, what appropriate protection they should be taking for themselves, and the importance of the work that they're doing.
When you speak to the staff at local clinics, I mean, they are really in the forefront at the firing line. How are they feeling? How are our medical practitioners doing right now? Because if I, as an ordinary citizen, feel like I'm not coping, how are our doctors and nurses feeling?
I think that's a really important question. And I really want to stress that I think it's completely normal for healthcare workers to feel anxiety, normal and expected. On top of the anxieties that all community and the general public are having to face at this time, healthcare workers are also knowing that they're going to be put in situations where they are at increased risk. And they are also working often in contexts where they're not completely sure about the supply of essential resources and PPE coming to them. So those have created a lot of anxieties amongst staff.
And also they have to also deal with our mental health challenges and our anxiety about this. We know that globally there's a shortage in PPE. So what do you say to a local doctor or nurse to get them going?
So I think it's really important to talk generally about COVID-19 so that everyone understands what it is, because it is a new virus. People are not familiar. We're all learning. We're all in this together. And there is a lot of uncertainty about it. amongst medical and scientific circles. So for staff on the ground in primary healthcare, I think giving them information, telling them what has become apparent through the research that is going on, through experience of countries that are further ahead than us in the COVID pandemic, helps them to just grasp where we're at the moment and what the real risks are. And then we often talk about droplet spread and about the guidelines that the WHO and the National Department of Health and NICD have put out in terms of what the appropriate protective equipment is. And staff are often asked questions about, shouldn't we all be using N95 masks? And then we have to explain that there are global shortages and there's a limited supply, and there's a rationale behind the guidelines that have been developed so that we can use them for those healthcare workers that are most at risk, which is those that are conducting aerosol or droplet generating procedures. So explaining and discussing and allowing opportunity to grapple with some of these questions, I think really helps staff to understand it from a broader perspective. Because of course, you're grappling with this conflicting desire on the one hand to protect yourself with the best available equipment. And then I think realizing the bigger picture and the fact that we might be in this for a long time, and we need to make sure that our healthcare workers working in really high risk situations need to have adequate PPE. I think fosters a sense of teamwork and responsibility in staff and allows them to take responsibility for taking reasonable precautions themselves, but also acknowledging that PPE has to be used wisely and appropriately.
Now, earlier, our political analyst Ralph was telling us that obviously the extent is not the same in different provinces. You've got these doctors volunteering in Mpumalanga specifically. What do you say stands out about that province right now?
The thing about rural areas is what we've seen in other parts of the world already is that they tend to be somewhat neglected in a COVID response because people assume that they would be less at risk. But when COVID does enter those areas, it flares up quickly and spreads quickly. And if that health system is not ready to contain it, then it's a crisis waiting to happen.
Sure, that is very concerning because this is really here to stay with us, and rural communities, as you're mentioning, are often really neglected and forgotten. So I really hope in our response and in our government's response as well, we don't forget our rural communities. Is there anything else that you would like to add on this before we wrap up?
I think we've covered most of it. Just really to stress that healthcare worker anxiety is completely normal and to be expected. And we need to be supporting our healthcare workers by providing guidelines that are contextualized to the different contexts that they're working in, because South African healthcare contexts are very heterogeneous. And in addition, providing opportunities for healthcare workers to be listened to and have their fears addressed and to access information.
We're a bag of emotions right now. Zhamuhe Bella, who is a clinical psychologist and board member at SADC, is here with us today to help us through some of those lows. Mr. Bella, we are dealing with tumultuous changes, constricted in our movement and living in confined spaces. And we're just generally worried about our futures. How can one better take care of their mental health right now?
I think a good place to start is recognizing and knowing where we are. And as you introduced, there's a lot of worry. There's a lot of restriction. There's a lot of confinement. And I think as a society and as individuals, we are all just catching up with the implications of that, the results and the consequences of everything that's going on. We may all be sitting with a lot of feelings inside or not quite knowing. So a good place to begin, I think, is to know and to name what it is that we're sitting with. I think the first one is the anxiety that a lot of people will be sitting with. And that anxiety is all the way from an anticipatory anxiety where we do not quite know what is ahead of us and therefore we cannot do very much about it. However, we know that the thing with anticipatory anxiety is that it's oftentimes much worse in our minds and our hearts, and it plagues us because it relies on our internal fears and fantasies a lot of the times, all the way through to the anxieties of will we be okay, not just physically in the capacity and the possibility to fall ill from this virus, but will we be okay as a society? Will we be okay in ourselves into the future? And that can be incredibly distressing for a lot of people. I think in addition to that, there is a lot of distress which is related to the depression of having to be at home, to being confined, to being isolated. And that can be accompanied with a lot of really low moods and feelings of sadness and of demotivation and disillusionment and being incredibly despondent, which are really, really difficult to deal with and sometimes really difficult just to know. I also wanted to highlight the grief that a lot of people will be going through right now, and that we imagine will be going through in the future, not only as individuals, though as a society, where we have to face the losses, unfortunately, of certain lives. Some will be friends, family, and colleagues, but we will also face the loss of the world as it was, because it will not return to normal. I think where a lot of people will also struggle incredibly uniquely is the loss of livelihood, where they will not have what they had before, and the pain and suffering that will bring. So yes, I mean, the picture is incredibly bleak at this point. And I think what might be important is to find each other. So when we're being asked to self-isolate and to distance ourselves socially, we should hope that that does not result in some form of soul isolation too, which will make things worse. In fact, we know that in times of distress, what the human psyche oftentimes wants to do is to find another, to reach out, to connect, because that's oftentimes where we find comfort. And that is incredibly important to do in this time, in order to know not only that you're not alone, though to be with somebody in these moments of distress, even if it is virtual.
I find it so incredible that you talk about not only self-isolation, but making sure that you don't soul-isolate, because a lot of people may also be self-isolating physically by themselves and feeling out of touch. And your advice would be keep in touch.
Absolutely. So we have two forms in my mind to try and keep in touch. And that's not just to reach out to people and persons out there through kind of hygienic social media practices, as well as through keeping communications going. Reaching out, it really may be an opportunity to catch up with people that you've lost touch with in a huge way. But there's also an important opportunity here to get in touch with yourself as well, where isolation is then converted possibly into solace and solitude, spending time with yourself, potentially getting to know yourself better, and also then finding the creative gaps and cocoons inside of your own mind and heart, which can give an opportunity for great creativity and generativity as well. So it's not just getting in touch with others. I think there's a great opportunity to also get in touch with yourself.
What sort of role does being home and especially working from home play?
So, of course, a lot of people have had to adjust to working from home, migrating from being in social spaces to being in isolation and working from them. And I think that it has a huge impact. I think one of the impacts is the fact that there's the risk that when you work from home, a home is no longer home. It gets converted into the space which is also work, which can really rob you of the experience of home, can really rob you from the kind of safety of your own space. And it can be incredibly invasive and intrusive. And you then absolutely need to be attentive to that. And it can be very difficult if you do have a very small space. So more concrete practical tips like having a work space within the home and keeping it to that is quite important at the best of times. I think that working from home can have its challenges too, because there is the risk that you do not have the transitional experience of driving to work and driving from work. And I think it's something that we oftentimes take for granted. So that 15 to 13 to maybe 1 hour experience of being able to move between spaces is incredibly transformative. Not only does it prepare you for the working day ahead and the work environment, but it also allows for a switching off process, which does not happen immediately when you drive back to home from work. And I think in this regard, they can also be really practical tips to perhaps take a moment at the end of the day, whether it's sitting outside or sitting in a particular space, really to switch off. It's very difficult to imagine that you're going to move immediately from one work screen to the couch and the home screen and have had the absolute switching off that is necessary. So that is important. I think the last thing about working from home that's also really important to hold on to is that especially for people who are working with partners or other people at home, is that it can create an environment with a lot of competitiveness, and that can really impact the relationship and the intimacy, because now the frustration of having a colleague is also then held with having a partner, or is held by the partner, and that can potentially be incredibly damaging. So there can also be the sense of who stops working first, which is a rivalrous kind of competition, and then you push each other too far. So being attentive to the mechanics of this and the deliberateness and being incredibly thoughtful of the extent of this change is very important.
Thank you very much. We're all dealing with unfamiliar territory, but how are medical teams coping? Vula Mobile has been supporting medical practitioners with the current mental health challenges. We are joined by some of the team. If you could please introduce yourself and tell us what the needs look like and what is being done.
Hi, my name is Kayla Pattenden. I am a social worker with a special interest and experience in the trauma and crisis management spheres, as well as leadership and systems, so developing systems to cope during crisis, essentially. I'm Cape Town based, and one of the reasons that I'm privileged enough to speak into this particular topic is because I have established a hotline, which is a response mechanism for those with mental health challenges from medical practitioners on the front line. So we receive calls from nurses, administrators, maintenance staff, as well as your doctors and laboratory workers who are actually dealing with the virus directly. We have been very privileged in that we have managed to network with incredible partners like Vula, allowing us a larger reach and a larger platform in order to make sure that the service is accessible in the most rural list of areas and then the most cosmopolitan areas as well.
I'm Dr. Chinazo. Some people know me as Naz. I work as the clinical relations manager at Vula Mobile. So we've decided to create a platform for help workers who are out there on the front. And this platform is bringing together groups of counselors and psychiatrists and psychologists like Kayla. And the platform is a place where the healthcare workers can connect with them directly to have that initial contact with counselors or with mental health specialists. We know that healthcare workers on a regular day are burnt out, and it's like a norm for healthcare workers to not seek mental health care. So we're hoping that this would help make it easier for healthcare workers to just pick up their phone and have that direct contact with mental health specialists, especially in those situations of crisis where they need that immediate care. And we're also offering 2 initial sessions free for 45 minutes, thanks to Kayla and the other teams of counselors and mental health specialists. And I think this would really help. I can tell you more about Vula, but I think Kayla could talk about what exactly healthcare workers are going through at this time.
So this is a very complex time for all of us, irrespective of whether you are directly confronting the virus on the front line or whether you are obliging to lockdown regulations requiring that you stay home. Mental health is something that is an issue irrespective of where we are. But there are definitely certain triggers and certain experiences which make it more of a lived reality or experience. And that's what we're expecting from our frontliners. We're expecting triggers, experiences that result in mental health becoming the next pandemic. I've read numerous articles which speak about how post-traumatic stress disorder, which is the state after experiencing something quite traumatic where your body starts to physically deal with the stress as well as psychologically deal with the stress. There's been lots of comments around how that's going to be the next pandemic. And what's really essential then is that instead of us creating this idea of let's wait for that to happen and deal with it then, we're working in a more preventative manner, which means that as your medical frontliners are experiencing triggers, close encounters with death, large overcrowded waiting rooms with a lack of medical resources to deal with them, extreme anger from patients, extreme breakdown risk from various medical practitioners, lack of sleep, etc., etc. These things are all things which could result in the eventual need for somebody to take a break. And a break is not a bad thing. A break is necessary. And sometimes our mental health becomes compromised when we don't take those breaks. So what we're doing is we're establishing a system that says, when you identify that you are triggered in any of these ways, instead of waiting until such a point where you have a state of post-traumatic stress disorder, which eventually removes you from the frontline in totality, preventing your long-term effectiveness, rather connect with a counselor who can then support you. The other big concern that we have in an unprecedented time like this, as far as mental health is concerned, is that we are directing all of our resources and all of our manpower, as well as our psychological energy, if you will, in preparation for the pandemic, which is expected to be quite overwhelming. What that means then is that we have a lack of resourcing and a lack of availability to other medical issues, other social issues, which are still very relevant. In fact, some of them are growing astronomically because there's a lack of attention on them now, and now the attention's on the pandemic. And so what's happened is we have a lot of doctors who are in a constant state of stress because they're torn. Their loyalty is no longer with their asthmatic patients or with their lung disease patients, for the simple reason that the resources that would ordinarily go to them are now being reserved and redirected to the COVID-19 sector and patients. That's a good thing for a shortened period. But what's happening is as the period lengthens, as lockdown lengthens, and as the disease doesn't hit as quickly and as rapidly as one would expect, your doctors are starting to question the necessity of allocating all of these resources and manpower in this direction toward the pandemic.
That has been really enlightening. Thank you very much to our experts for being generous with your time and also being generous with your knowledge. Remember to click on subscribe so that you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes. From me, Masa Kekana. Stay safe, South Africa, and stay home.